everybody. Thanks for joining me for this talk on Helen Parrish Brown. She never used the name Caroline, and she was the favorite. Helen was born in October 1882 in Paris, the only daughter of James Parrish and Emma Parrish. With loving parents who also happened to be very rich and very well connected and culturally enlightened, Helen enters the world with every advantage to grow into her role as Southampton's golden girl of the Gilded Age. Helen's father, Samuel Parrish's less known but richer brother, was making his home in Paris at the time, acquiring a fortune representing European investors in American railroads during the frenzied era of railroad reorganization. Fluent in French and a connoisseur of continental arts and culture, he's a doting father to Helen and her younger brother, James Jr. The marriage of Helen's parents in January 1882 is his first and her second. Not much is known about her previous life as Mrs. Edward King, except that she had a daughter and was widowed in 1873. What is known is that her grandfather was Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, and that she shares James's social and cultural interests. They soon settle in New York City, and they become popular members of New York society. There, Helen, along with James Jr., enjoys the carefree days of a privileged child until 1887, when her mother dies at the heartbreaking age of 41. There's the Commodore. Helen is just 5 when her mother dies, a wrenching and baffling loss for a child, but she will never feel unloved. She's the apple of her father's eye, and he's the father of any child's dreams. A man who loves life, seemingly hardwired for happiness, and full of life. Never tied to a desk, he's able to devote much of his time to pleasure and to his children, while keeping a close eye on his investments. He's an extremely shrewd investor. And even when his affairs take him away from home, he remembers to send Helen a birthday telegram. Until her death in 1895, Helen's grandmother, Sarah Redwood Parrish, is another font of love and attention. In the 1880s, the Parrish family gravitates towards Southampton in the summer, first renting and then acquiring some of the most beautiful dwellings in all of the Hamptons. In 1889, James and his brother Samuel asked their friend Stanford White to design a house for their mother. The result is White Fence, which you see here, which survives on First Neck Lane, and where Helen and James, seen in the picture, bask in the warmth of their grandmother's affection. While Sarah Redwood Parrish has a reputation in Southampton as a rigorous guardian of old school etiquette, she surely makes some exceptions for her grandchildren. The childless Samuel Parrish cherishes Helen as a favorite niece. By the time he adds the beautiful Rogers Mansion to the growing list of family mansions in 1899, Helen is no longer a child. At 17, she's popular, gracious, and often at her uncle's side when he entertains. The 1843 Greek Revival mansion now the home of the Southampton History Museum, will be moved back from its original location on Main Street and expanded before Samuel's finished with it, but it will always remain a family gathering place. After golf is introduced to Southampton in the 1890s, introduced by her uncle Sam Parrish, also Duncan Cryder and their friend Edward Mead, the young Helen catches the bug. With encouragement from her father and uncle, both zealous players known to have played in the snow, she hones her skills at the Shinnecock Hills Golf Club, where a small loop of 9 holes north of the clubhouse is reserved for the women. She becomes an excellent golfer, good enough to give her father a run, despite the extravagant Gilded Age garb women are expected to wear on the links. Young, lively, and single towards the turn of the 20th century, Helen is known to stray a bit from her grandmother's ideal of conventional female behavior, though certainly it causes no distress to her pleasure-loving father. Through the efforts of her Uncle Sam Parrish, among others, William Merritt Chase's Shinnecock Hills Summer School of Art opens in 1891, drawing art students to Southampton, where an enclave of cottages known as the Art Village offers rental accommodations. As a prime mover in establishing the school, Samuel Parrish is also a prime investor in Art Village property, and Helen benefits. She's able to occupy the charming cottage called Honeysuckles and to join the revels of the aspiring artists, fashionable bohemians who are her neighbors. Rumors circulate about scandalous parties at the Art Village, and many locals suspecting orgies would like to see the place closed down. But the rumors are exaggerated, and the school survives until 1902, a shielded enclave safe from Philistine outsiders. In 1902, Helen joins her father and brother in Austria. James Sr. is showing his 19-year-old son his old haunts in Europe, staying at the best hotels and eating in the finest restaurants. Later, he writes beautifully about the trip, doubly enjoyed because his children are his traveling companions. In a place called Karosee, near Innsbruck, he writes beautifully of, quote, mountain walks beneath the deep shade of the evergreens, leading to charming views, with here and there a rude seat for the weary. And after 2 nights, Jimmy having made the ascent of one of the peaks, and Helen having made the acquaintance of the lovely little wife of a Viennese doctor, our visit was over. A year later, on September 15, 1903, James Sr. escorts his daughter down the aisle at St. Andrew's Doon Church at her wedding to Archibald Manning Brown. Brown, who also had spent childhood summers in Southampton with his family, is a Harvard graduate with a future as a prominent architect. The Reverend Endicott Peabody, headmaster of Groton, performs the ceremony, for which Helen has chosen a dress of white mousseline de soie trimmed with orange blossoms. She wears a lace veil and an opal and diamond pin, a gift from the bridegroom. A reception, attended by a who's who of Southampton society, is held at James Parrish's beachfront home, Zee on Doon. Once located at the ocean end of First Neck Lane opposite the Meadow Club, it has not survived. but it has an interesting history. It did survive the 1938 hurricane and acquired the name that some people might remember, the Ark. When so many of the Victorian cottages were crushed by the enormous surge of water that spilled over the beach, the windows for the staff at the lowest level of the building provided a passageway for the sea surge, knocking out the basement and staff quarters, but leaving the entire dwelling standing, surrounded by water. It was later owned by the Bee Gees and became a celebrity hangout, famous for its star-studded volleyball games on the beach. The Bee Gees paid $300,000 for it, and they sold it to Woody Allen for $3 million in 1982. His was a brief stay, though, since the sound of the surf made him nervous. And circa 2000, the house was destroyed by fire. A few weeks after the wedding, Helen and Archibald head for Paris, where Brown furthers his architectural studies at the Académie des Beaux-Arts. On the return to the States, Archibald is soon a partner in the prestigious New York architectural firm Peabody, Wilson, and Brown, best known for its large country residences. Many are on Long Island's Gold Coast, but there are also some in Southampton, including the magnificent Ocean Castle and the J.W. Funk residence, Cobble Court, on the dunes. Married to a prosperous and prestigious architect, and with a rich family life that eventually includes 5 children, Helen is busy and happy. She and Archibald spend winters in New York and part of the summer at Southampton, where she remains a favorite with her aunts and uncles. In a family gathering around the lily pond in the garden of Uncle Sam's Art Museum, circa 1905, she, Archibald, and their first child, baby Helen, are surrounded by relatives, including Uncle Sam in a cap. Southampton and the presence of her father continued to lure Helen to the village, even in winter. On a frigid day, Helen is observed braving the cold with her children to join James Sr. on the ice at Old Town Pond. A vigorous widower at the start of the new century, James has never remarried, though women adore him and seek him out as an escort. When he's not relishing his role as father and grandfather, he devotes himself to his passions for golf and ice skating. Another impressive mansion in the long line of exquisite Parrish family dwellings is James Sr.'s vast castle-like Heathermere in Shinnecock Hills. A full 300 feet long, with uncounted rooms, it is the grandest of all. But what James really appreciates is its location, as close to the golf course as it can possibly be without actually being on it. It is, in his later years, his summer headquarters, and probably a sure lure for his daughter, who can brush up on her swing while visiting her father. That building has not survived. Around 1910, Archibald and Helen acquire East Farm in St. James on Stony Brook Harbor, a magnificent 30-acre property with an historic house and many outbuildings. East Farm began as a family homestead in 1689 with a farmhouse built in 1710 and outbuildings added over the years. When the news spreads of its acquisition by the hugely successful architect Archibald Brown, No one is surprised to see him get down to work with substantial additions and improvements, enlarging and remodeling the house to create a country home for the ages. Much later, when the Browns no longer own it, his additions, considered inappropriate, are removed. Preservationists approve of their removal, but are upset by other changes in the historic estate. And in 1993, they succeed in placing it on the National Register of Historic Places and give it some protection. Helen receives frequent visits at East Farm from her father, who is, of course, extremely fond of his grandchildren. His 1916 diary, which is in the Southampton History Museum's archives, has many references to his trips to Stony Brook, which is near enough for a pleasant drive from Southampton. Motoring, the term used for what was once a recreational activity, is one more way he finds to indulge his almost limitless capacity for enjoying the good things in life. On October 12th, Helen gives birth to her fifth child, and her father is on hand at East Farm to greet the new arrival. He writes in his diary, "Helen's boy was born at 3 a.m. All goes well. Lucy," that's his grandchild, "screamed out to me from her bicycle before 8 a.m. as she and Helen and Archie, her siblings, came out for breakfast." James Parrish dies in July 1926 at the age of 86. In the favored way most people would prefer, in his bed at the Metropolitan Club, having played 9 holes the day before his death and enjoyed some music after dinner. Helen and her brother are big beneficiaries, of course, in the will. By the time the accountants have sorted through the securities and personal property of James Parrish's estate, 2 years later, in 1928, an additional $317,000 has accumulated since his death for a total of $7 million, testimony to his financial acumen and attention to his investments. Helen inherits the end June, while Heathermere goes to her brother. In 1932, the Browns are about to establish another splendid residence in New York City when tragedy strikes. They're planning to move into a new duplex maisonette that opens directly onto the gardens at the city's coveted River House complex. Furnished entirely in the Scandinavian modernist style, the height of fashion at the time, the apartment is ready at last for the Browns to move in when Helen dies at the age of 49. The New York Times reports her death of pneumonia at Heathermere in Southampton on June 28th, following a 2-month illness. Mrs. Brown was 49 years old, the account continues, and had been identified in activities at Southampton all of her life. Helen is buried in the Parrish family plot at Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia, where her father is buried and where her Uncle Samuel Parrish was interred just 2 months before Helen. After the loss of his wife, a grieving Archibald finds it impossible to live in the apartment at River House, and he never moves in. 2 years later, he and the well-known interior designer, Eleanor Macmillan, are married, and he moves into her residence on 57th Street. The Riverhead duplex is eventually owned by another summer Southamptonite, Mary Lee Johnson. Helen's story ends here. I hope you'll join me on November 24th for my next talk, which will be on Ruth Wales DuPont, who was born into a wealthy family and married into an even wealthier family, but never let money take over her life. I hope you'll join us then. And Connor, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, everybody. This was a great talk today. Hey, Mary, sorry about that.
Okay.
But yeah, if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to submit them in either the chat function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. There's also a Q&A function where you can submit any questions you might have about this talk, and we can go over them today. Let's see, I have an email, seeing if that's anything. No, it was vaguely somebody trying to get into this talk, but let's see. Okay. If nobody has any questions, oh, there we go, we got one. Let's see. Do you have any information about Helen's children's lives?
I'm afraid I do not. I didn't pursue genealogically.
Okay. And then a reply to that saying thank you. Let's see. And this was, you said James Parrish's daughter, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I just know I'm doing research now myself on the Parrish family, and Mary's given me a couple books to read up on and things like that. And so I'm just now getting to the point where I'm charting out the family trees. So it's all sort of swirling around in my brain right now, but I don't know anything in particular about their kids either. I'm probably not going to go that deep into the history going forward. But yeah, if there's no other questions, thank you everybody for watching. We'll have this up on the internet soon for you to share around with anybody that might have missed it or you think might be interested. We want to thank you again for joining us, and have a good day, everybody.